I have 3 pretty large Echeveria, Pachysedum hybrids here that really need to be repotted. So I bought them months ago at a local nursery, and I don't love the soil that they're planted in. It's really hard to water, and I'll show you why that is in just a minute. This one is going to go into this rather large pot. It's not the best shape for succulents, but it's beautiful and I have it, so we're going to use it. Typically, I recommend more shallow pots for succulents rather than tall and skinny. Size-wise, I think this will fit in really well, and the colors complement the pot nicely. This one, I'm probably just going to plant it as is into this pot. I'll probably pull off the babies. And then this one, I'm actually going to chop up and plant the cutting in one spot and plant the base in another pot as well. It just doesn't look amazing right now shape-wise, so we're gonna give it a new shape. Let's start with this one. It's Pachysedum Ganzhou, and I love the pink and purple color up here. It's not quite as attractive down below, but this is also a really good example of why these are hard to water. So this soil is very hydrophobic, meaning it repels water when it's dry. And if you follow the channel, you know that I recommend soaking the soil completely when you water and then letting it dry out completely. So in order to get this soaked all the way through, I have to bottom water these. So I'm usually setting this inside another container with no drainage, letting it fill up all the way and sit for anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes so that the soil gets soaked all the way through, and then let it dry out again. That doesn't work super well with my plant stand setup, and so these have been very underwatered, although they're doing just fine. They don't mind that long period of drought in between. But I really want to get this broken up, put this into a grittier soil, and then I'm going to chop the top off. So I'm going to start by just squeezing the soil here to kind of break it up, loosen it up, and just keep the roots. I don't really want to keep very much of the original soil because it causes problems once it's in the gritty mix that I use, but I'm also not going to spend a ton of time trying to really get it super duper cleaned off. Just enough effort to get it mostly clean, and then we'll pot it up in that gritty mix. As I'm going through this, I'm really not worried about roots coming off, and if they are kind of a funky shape or length, I'll usually just break them off. One of the things that's really important about repotting succulents, if you're breaking roots, and even if you're not, you do want to let them dry for a day or so before you water them. If you don't, you're a little bit more likely to get some rot, which is never fun after you just worked so hard to replant something. This base looks good, and normally I would just pot this right up into some soil, but I think because the top of this is so lopsided, I'm going to cut it first and then we'll pot the base. Let the cutting dry and I'll pot that in a day or two. I have my handy dandy pruning shears here, and I love these. They're just super sharp and easy to use. I'll put a link in the description. But I'm gonna go in, I think I wanna cut off somewhere around here. Let's do it like this. Whenever possible, if I'm taking a cutting, I like to leave leaves on the base plant. It just helps it absorb more sunlight and grow a little bit better. However, if you remove a few of the leaves, that will actually help encourage new babies to form wherever the leaves were originally attached. So with this one, I think I'm going to take the leaf off right here at the top, and we'll go one over here. These leaves propagate really well. You'll get new babies from all of these leaves. This has actually been a really fun succulent to have and to grow. I bought it with the intent to propagate a bunch. It had some on the original pot that I bought, but I also was intending to pull a bunch of these leaves off and start those as well. I think I'm going to leave it like this. Looks super goofy, but it'll start to fill out with some new babies over time. Now with this one, I'm going to try and be careful not to touch the upper leaves. I don't want to wipe off that farina. Farina is like a sunscreen for succulents, and it also helps repel water. So avoid wiping that off as much as possible. You can tell which succulents have it because they look almost a little bit dusty. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the lower leaves on this. The roots will actually grow at the leaf nodes, and I want a decent amount to be able to put into the soil so that it stays really stable. And I like the shape of that right now. I feel like if I pull these off, it's going to be a little funky, so I'm going to call that good. I did not keep that end very clean. If you want to, you can use a rooting hormone, but typically I have success without using one. So with this, I'm gonna go ahead and just let it dry. Like I said, for about a day or two, wait for that end to callus over before I pot it up. There's a nice collection of leaves that I can propagate now. Let's go ahead and pot this up. The soil that I'm using here is Bonsai Jack's Gritty Mix. I use it for the majority of my succulents. I have started using another soil mix called Magic Succulent Soil, but you mostly just want to make sure you have something that's really well draining. You don't want soil like what I showed you in the original planting, where it takes a lot of effort for the water to be absorbed, and that soil also doesn't drain especially well either. Succulents do not like to sit in wet soil for very long. Of course, I also need to update the Succulent Tracker app. So I'm going to go into here. I am going to record that I repotted this and that I put it into Gritty Mix. The other thing I'm going to do is mark that I pruned this. So I cut off the top. I'm also going to update the photo for this. That way I can see the progress that it has made over time and remember what it looked like before I cut it. The other thing I need to do is add the cutting in. So I'm going to go ahead and take a picture of it. Add in the name. And then I don't have a location for this yet, but I do want to write a note that I took it from a different plant. I'm going to go ahead and add some tags as well. I got this from Cook's Nursery and it was a cutting. That should be good for now. Eventually I'll update the location and then I'll also pot it and take a picture once I have it potted. So that one's all finished. We'll move on to the next one. This one is called Echeveria Deep Red, which I find to be a little interesting because it's actually purple. Nevertheless, it is a really pretty plant and it needs a new home. So I'm going to pull these babies off as I break off all this soil, and then I'll put this in a bigger pot and these into smaller pots. Just like the other one, this soil is really hard and compacted, so it's hard for succulents to grow roots in that. You can see it has a bunch of aerial roots here. When the soil is really compact like this, it's hard for succulents to put off thick roots. This does have a good root system, but with a gritty soil mix, you'll see typically a lot thicker, healthier roots overall. Now, I am pretty sure that these little babies are attached to the stem right here. I can't see it because of all the roots in this soil, but I can kind of feel it. They're not like leaf propagations or something that were in the pot, but they were attached to the mother plant. I'm going to set those down for a minute and finish getting this soil off. Oh, and right there you can see where I pulled it off. That little break right there. So this does have some thicker, healthier roots up here at the top, which is a good sign. Then I don't want all this big tangle of roots at the bottom, so I'm just going to pull it off. And that one will be good to go. Now this little cluster is interesting. They are all part of the same kind of branch. It's not crested, it's just 3 stems that grew off that one spot. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut these off just to make those cuts a little cleaner. And you can see this does still have some roots attached to it, which should help it root a little bit better. But because I'm cutting these, I am not going to pot them up right now. I'm going to wait a day or two to let the callus dry, and then I'll pot them up. I'm going to go ahead and remove these lower leaves and then pull off a few of these lower leaves here. These will also propagate from leaves, so I'll go ahead and save those because who doesn't want more plants? All right, so there's the 3 little baby cuttings that I will pot up in a day or two. With this one, I'm also going to pull off just a couple leaves at the bottom. These aren't quite as plump and firm, which is fine. They would eventually kind of shrivel up anyway, but I just want to make sure I have plenty of stem and root to go down into the soil when I plant this. I also don't want to mess with the farina on this, but I want to keep it in place while I'm putting the soil in. So I'm just going to kind of put my hand on top gently and then fill in around the base with soil. All right, that one is all done, and I will go ahead and water it tomorrow. And then lastly, we have Echeveria grosso, kind of an unusual name, but a really cool color. And this one, I'm gonna go ahead and loosen the soil. It just has 2 babies attached to it, but similar to that other plant, it looks like they're coming off the same little stem. This one also has a pretty good root system too, so that's very encouraging. I am gonna just pull this off right here. They are actually separate from each other, so I'm just gonna pull them apart. I will probably still let these dry out for a day before I repot them. They could probably handle being repotted right now. Whoops. But since I'm doing some others in a day or two, I'll go ahead and wait and do these in a day or two as well. I want to remove a few of the bigger lower leaves on this guy. Again, just so I have some space to get plenty of soil in around the base of the plant and get it supported. Plus, there's more to propagate that way too. This one is not totally stretched out, but it is a little bit stretched. I don't mind it. It looks better than the very first Pachysedum that I did, but from the top, it looks amazing. So I'm gonna go ahead and just leave it for now. As it gets a little taller, I'll probably come in and chop it off. This pot really is too deep for this, but I'm gonna just go for it anyway. Sometimes you just do things that don't make perfect sense. I'll go ahead and place this in. I want the leaves above the rim of the pot, so I'm just gonna kind of hold it in place here and then fill in around the edges. You can see right here where I bumped the farina and kind of wiped it off. The plant is gonna be totally fine, but you just don't wanna create those marks if you can help it. The farina does not grow back, so once it's wiped off, you'll permanently see that little mark on the leaves. That was a really good little repotting session that I've probably been putting off for way too long. I've had these plants for months, but I am happy to finally get them all potted up in some fresh soil. It'll make it much easier to water them. And then I have a bunch of leaf babies that I'll get to propagate as well. And of course, I realized afterward that I have not put this in the Succulent Tracker app yet. So I will go ahead and do that to make sure I have all of this great information saved so I don't have to remember when I repotted it, when I watered last, or what I chopped off. Plus, it'll have a photo history so I can see the progress of each one. If you want to check out the Succulent Tracker app, you can just search for Succulent Tracker in either the Google Play or Apple App Store, and it should be the first thing that pops up, or you can go to succulenttracker.com.